So good evening. I'm Robert Polito, Director of the New School Writing Program, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening of readings and conversation with the finalists for this year's Story Prize. Our congratulations to the three nominees and our gratitude to Larry Dark and Julie Lindsay. It's an honor for all of us here at the New School each year to co-sponsor this program with them. I'd also like to take this moment to acknowledge and mourn the passing of one of the great masters of the American short story, our friend Barry Hannah. And like Barry's work, the Story Prize is a celebration of the vitality and the ambition and the panache of short fiction in our time. And Larry and Julie are doing something incredibly valuable and important. So please join me now in welcoming Larry Dark.
Thank you, Robert. Wow, it's a great crowd. We're really excited tonight. This is the sixth time we'll be handing out the Story Prize to an author of an outstanding story collection. And you'll be hearing from three accomplished authors, Daniyal Mueenuddin, Victoria Patterson, and Wells Tower. All three will read from their work and discuss it with me on stage. Julie Lindsay and I created this award to give recognition not only to the three books we choose as the finalists, or the one book that wins the top prize, but to story collections themselves. And short fiction has been on something of a roll lately, with bestsellers, prize nominees and winners, and Oprah selection. I like to think that the gentle push we've given the form has contributed to that momentum. And based on the amazing work we read each year, I expect it will continue. This is the fifth year we've been at the New School, and they've proven to be an exceptional partner, the graduate writing program. Most of all, I'd like to thank the Chisholm Foundation for generously endowing the Story Prize. Tonight is also a first for us. All three finalists, for the first time since we've done this, are debut authors. Now, because many fiction writers start out writing short stories, we do read a lot of debuts each year. But tonight's finalists are not what comes to mind when you think of debut authors. These collections, In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, Drift, and Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned, are not the work of precocious youths. They are the results of years of deep thought, astute observation, tenacity, perseverance, endurance, and hard-won skill. All of this has produced not the novice work the idea of a debut evokes, but mature work of lasting value, as you will hear when the authors read from their work shortly, I promise you. We will have a brief intermission between the second and third readers, which will provide an opportunity to buy signed copies of the books. McNally Jackson, one of the top independent booksellers anywhere, is selling books. And if you haven't, I urge you to buy and read these story collections, and they're all signed by the authors. And one of our finalists will be reading at McNally Jackson tomorrow night. All right, here's the perfunctory part. Please remember, Alice, to turn off your phones, beepers, Nooks, Kindles, iPads, etc., if you haven't already, and any other device I haven't named. The format is simple. The authors read. We talk about their books on stage. So let's get to the meat of the program, the author readings. Our first reader is Daniyal Mueenuddin. By the second story in Other Rooms, Other Wonders, which is called Salima, the story he'll be reading from tonight, I knew I was hooked. And I was confident that I was in the hands of a gifted storyteller. The 8 stories in this collection are like spokes in a wheel revolving around the character of a feudal landlord in southern Pakistan over several decades. We see servants, managers, the great man himself, family members, a cast of flawed characters defined by their yearnings, like people anywhere at any time. I was particularly captivated by Daniyal's ability to get inside the minds and the hearts of his characters. I'm pleased to introduce the author of In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, Daniyal Mueenuddin. Thank you.
So as Larry said, I'm going to read the introduction to Salima, which is a story about a woman who works as a maid in the house of K.K. Haruni, who is the sort of central is the center around which the people in this book revolve. He's a feudal landlord, and sort of on his way out, in the sense that his class is dying. So I think I'll just start. Salima was born in the Jhulan clan, blackmailers and bootleggers, Muslim refugees at partition from the country northwest of Delhi. They were lucky. The new border lay only 30 or 40 miles distant, and from thieving expeditions, they knew how to travel unobserved along canals and tracks. Skirting the edge of the Cholistan desert, crossing into Pakistan, on the fourth night, they came to a Hindu village abandoned by all but a few old women. They drove them away and occupied the houses, finding pots and pans, buckets, even guard dogs, which grew accustomed to them. During Salima's childhood, 20 years later, the village was gradually being absorbed into the slums cast off by an adjacent provincial town called Kotla Sardar. Her father became a heroin addict and died of it. Her mother slept around for money and favors, and she herself at 14 became the plaything of a small landowner's son. Then a suitor appeared, strutting the village on leave from his job in the city, and plucked her off to Lahore. He looked so slim and city bright, and soon proved to be not only weak but depraved. These experiences had not cracked her hard skin, but made her sensual, unscrupulous, and romantic. One morning she lay in the bed of the cramped servants' quarters in Lahore, where she and her husband lived. He was gone for the day, aimless and sloping around the streets, unwanted at the edge of the crowd in a tea stall. Though he knew right away that she slept with Hassan, the cook, in this house where she served as a maid, the first time he opened his mouth, she made to slap him and pushed him out of the room. And next day, as usual, he hungrily took the few rupees she gave to buy twists of rocket pills, his amphetamine addiction. She picked at the chipped polish on her long, slim toe, feeling sorry for herself. Her oval face, taller than broad, with deep-set eyes, had a grace contrasting with her bright, easy temperament. At 24, this hard life had not yet marked her, and when she smiled, her dimples made her seem even younger, just a girl. She still had some of the girl's gravity. It was true, the cook Hassan had gotten everything from her. As always, she'd given it too soon. She had been a maidservant in 3 houses so far since her husband lost his job as a peon in an office, and in every one she'd opened her legs for the cook. She'd been here at Gulfashan, the Lahore mansion of the landlord K.K. Haruni, only a month, and already she'd slept with Hassan. The cooks tempted her, lording it over the kitchen where she liked to sit, with the smell of broth and green vegetables cooking and sauce. And she had duties in the kitchen. She made the chapatis, so thin and light that they almost floated up to the ceiling. She had that in her hands. Mr. Haruni had called her into the dining room at lunch one day and said he'd never in 70 years eaten better ones, while she blushed and looked at her bare feet. And then the delicacies that Hassan gave her, the best parts, things that should have gone to the table, foreign things, pistachio ice cream and slices of sweet pies, baked tomatoes stuffed with cheese, potato cutlets, things that she asked for, village food, curry with marrow bones and carrot halwa. The entire household, from the sahib on down, had been eating to suit her appetite. "Ask for it, my duckling," said Houghton in the morning when she drank her tea sitting beside him, hunched together in the kitchen. "I need to fatten you up. I like them plump." "Don't talk that way. I come from a respectable family." "Well, whatever kind of family, what should I stuff that rounded little belly with today?" And he wobbled off to the market on his bicycle with a big woven basket strapped on the back, riding so slowly that he could almost have walked there faster, pedaling with his knees pointed out. Thank you.
So things don't turn out too well for Salima, do they?
No, they don't actually. Poor thing. There actually was a real Salima, and she had a happier ending.
Oh, she did. Well, that's good to know.
No, you see, we, as writers, we have to have an ending with a bang, I suppose.
Yeah, I think a lot of your characters kind of end with a bang. It seems like.
Yeah, it's true. I've been accused of being too dark, but I think that's sort of the way I see it.
Yeah.
You know, Pakistan is screwed up.
Yeah.
And it's true.
So is America, by the way.
Yeah. No, but here at least you have sort of you have housing and food and
That's
cars.
right.
And in America, even a poor person has a car.
Right.
And in Pakistan, a poor person can't afford to eat. So it's a different scale of misery. Although one thing that I've observed is that people basically live within the same range of emotions. Mm-hmm. So even a very poor person in Pakistan will basically have the same experiences of their own, wealth and power and food and as you will have in America. Right. People are very resilient.
Mm-hmm. How did you? Now, who was this Salima? How did you observe her?
Salima was actually my sister-in-law. Normally, the people who worked in my father's house came from our village, but my sister-in-law decided that she wanted somebody to be her sort of a maidservant, and this girl was brought in. She was plump and very. She had a gap between her teeth. Chaucer says, a gap-toothed woman is sensual, and she was sensual, and so I saw her there.
The thing that struck me as I read this collection is really your ability to get inside of female characters, of women. There are a lot of really key women characters in this collection. Is that something that you thought about, or did that just kind of unfold that way?
The stories seem to require it. The process of writing a story is, when you start it, you try to figure out, what is the perspective that will reveal the story best. Mm-hmm. And I think that, the stories were better served by having these female characters be prominent and be the voice from which the story spoke. And I think also in Pakistan, the women are not they don't have a voice. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's pleasing, it's fun to give them a voice.
Plus, they have to exercise their power through men, which I think makes it more dramatic, right? It
exactly,
adds another
definitely.
level.
Yeah, exactly. And the guys always just get to do whatever they want to do.
Right.
But the women have to be the ones who are conniving, and that's a fun. That adds another layer to the mix.
It seems like all of it's kind of like upstairs, downstairs, in a way. You see the servants, and it seems like there's a lot of conniving and a lot of different levels of people jockeying for position. Is that something you observed?
Pakistan is a place, when people are more desperate, then they are more political. And in Pakistan, because there is such desperation, people have to jockey harder. Mm-hmm. If you are living in Illinois or Iowa or Wisconsin, you basically have a modicum of comfort, and therefore you don't need to push so hard. But in Pakistan is an incredibly political place. Mm-hmm. All my friends, the only thing they talk about is politics, and people just have to be observant of where they stand and and sort of to kowtow to the people above them,
Right.
and it's cruel. They're cruel to the people below them, and it's a much rougher place.
Are things different now? Now, you run a farm in Pakistan.
yeah,
Is it
exactly.
still the same kind of setup with servants, or has that changed?
No, it's still very much.
Wow.
Actually, it's become more desperate. The average the salaries of the people in the countryside have gone down, and we're almost reaching the point of people, not having food.
Huh.
The population has just exploded, and the number of jobs are limited, so therefore, the trajectory is down, not up.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite ugly actually.
So one thing I wondered about the story is what range of time did the stories kind of take place over? Like, when was this story, Salima? What time was that?
It would be in the 80s.
In the 80s.
Yeah. I've sort of intentionally, or not intentionally, but I'm a romantic, and I love nostalgia.
Right.
And that's one of the things that makes me write, and therefore, I look back to previous times. But I think also you can see in this, in those times, you can see the threads that lead to Pakistan today. If you want to find a political meaning in my stories, which I'd sort of disavow.
Right. You mentioned that you're a romantic. You also described Salima as a romantic. It seems like it doesn't serve her too well.
Yeah.
Do you think that's part of her downfall, or do you think it's just destiny that someone in her position is only going to go so far?
I think that the world is a kind of place where you can make choices of being a romantic or a cynic, but I think basically you end up being happier if you're romantic.
I'll have to try that because I'm a cynic. Starting tonight, I'm a romantic. What does the title? There's a story in Other Rooms, Other Wonders, but I wasn't quite sure what that means. Is that something you can talk about?
Yeah. It's actually quite funny because I thought that I was using a phrase from an Elizabeth Bishop poem, and I kept looking for it and couldn't find it. And it's the poem is actually Varick Street, but I thought that I just had taken a straight line out of it, but I actually hadn't. So I don't know. So but it works because I think that I think it works because it's describing, the book is partly about the fact that these lives all coexist, and that there are all these different realities coexisting. My father was not aware of the fact that his servants had a life, and yet they have these incredibly rich lives, so it's useful.
What do you think made you aware? I know that your mother's American, so you have an American side also. Do you think that status?
I was brought up by servants. My parents were busy, and then I went back to live on my farm, and there was nobody there who spoke English, or nobody to hang out with. Right. So I was, my life was being with those people, and also you do business with people, and then there's an intimacy about business, right. Because in business there's no falseness. Business is about, you have something to sell, I have something to buy,
right?
You can screw me or I can screw you, but there's no personalities in it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, how did you come to write? I mean, you have this background where you have a family farm, and I guess all along you thought you might go back, and you didn't think that.
No, I didn't actually. No. I finished college, and I'd been writing poetry. I was one of those obnoxious people who think they're poets, and look down on everybody, and smoke Gauloise and
right,
and wear a sort of trench coat. um, then so I went back to Pakistan because my father told me that either I could come back and reclaim the farm or it was going to be lost. Because he couldn't do it any longer. He was old, then I thought I could write there. I could write poetry. So it was kind of a double project, my poetry wasn't. I was sort of a lyric poet, and that's a young man's game.
Well, you did write a line of Elizabeth Bishop, so
yeah.
That's pretty good. How does what you do with running the farm? How does that work in terms of your writing? Do you write when you're on the farm?
Yeah, that's where I write best, because I'm a manager,
Right.
And more and more I've managed to set it up so that I can do it almost remotely. But when I'm there, I'm very engaged. Mm-hmm. But I'm basically, my job is to identify people. This guy's good, this guy's bad. This guy can do this guy can do that, and it's unlike anything in the West, because you're sort of part of a family. There's a village, and I'm constantly aware of people's when people die. They say that dukh sukh, you have to go when they die, and you have to go in happy times, or you have to go in sad times. Mm-hmm. So when I go there, I have to go and pay condolences to all these people, and if they have weddings, then I will go there. And you're very engaged, and all the time I'm very aware of, which guy might be somebody that would be able to be promoted, and would be able to help me with my project.
And are some of these some of the same servants you knew when you were young? Are any of them still with you?
Many of them. Yeah.
Many of them are.
There are people who have been with us for 50 years and 60 years.
So you have to be a good judge of character, not just as a writer, but as a manager also.
That's what I do. Mm-hmm. That's what I do, is to try to identify people, you make huge mistakes. I have this guy who became like a manic depressive, and he was running in fact, I was just in Pakistan. This guy just fell apart, and it was a mistake. So.
You win some, you lose some, right?
He should have been a writer.
Yeah. Now, do the people that on the farm, do the people you work with, they know that you write also, that you have a book, and
they do know that I've written this book, because there have been journalists who came to the farm to stay with me, but they think of it as sort of like a sort of almost slightly embarrassing. Yeah. It's certainly nothing to be proud of. You do it with your left hand.
Right.
We have a mosque in our village, mm-hmm. and the Mueenuddin, the guy who says mm-hmm. the prayer, I have a guy who's a friend of mine mm-hmm. who works for me, and he came to me and said, this guy's written some poetry, but he thinks you might object to the fact that he's done it. And I said, no, I'm delighted. Mm-hmm. And I published we actually published his book. I don't know if it's any good, because it's in Saraiki, mm-hmm. which is a language I don't speak. But he was like embarrassed about it. It was like something he kept hidden. And he was very surprised when I embraced it. So I think writing is not like in the West. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, it's something that's.
It's not a serious profession.
It's not a serious
pursuit.
When I made money, then mm-hmm. I always emphasize the money, because then they think it's real.
Right. Yeah, it's real for very few writers. Yeah. Let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a sense, you're in an interesting situation compared to most writers. You have almost like an endless source of material.
Yeah,
at your hands.
That's true. I do. I have so much. I can never run out. Mm-hmm. I have pages and pages of just stories that I'd like to write, because Auden said that everybody, the best school for writers is. They should, if you were making an MFA program, mm-hmm. then they would have goats, and they would have, they'd have a garden, and I think that one of the problems for writers is that they live as writers, and that doesn't provide you with very much material. So yeah, I've been very lucky that way. I've been. If I were Bulgarian, nobody would be reading my stuff. It's just Pakistan is in the news.
Really? You think that's true?
Yeah, I do think so. I think I've been very lucky that way.
Yeah.
The Taliban should be getting half of my...
Be careful what you say.
Exactly. No.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Great job. Our next reader is Victoria Patterson. There are good books you see coming from afar and books that sneak up and take you by surprise. Victoria Pattersons Drift fell into the second category for me, and my admiration for it built story by story. The name Newport Beach, California calls to mind wealthy men and women, mansions, clubs and yachts. The deeply insightful and affecting stories in this collection show another, dare I say, more real side. Among the recurring characters are a young woman named Rosie, and a skateboarder known as John Wayne, ironically, who slices through the pages. You'll meet him soon. I'm pleased to introduce the author of Drift, Victoria Patterson.
Thank you, Larry. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm reading from John Wayne Loves Grandma Dot, and the only thing I want you to know about this story is that John Wayne is living above Rosie's grandparents' house, unbeknownst to her grandparents, in an apartment that her uncle has vacated to go to Vietnam and has never come back from. John Wayne Loves Grandma Dot. John Wayne wandered Newport Beach at night. An observer watching him drift through the streets might think his wanderings were random and thoughtless, but John Wayne had his own logic and pattern. He believed in things unseen. He walked slowly past certain homes, skateboard at his side, sensing possibilities as though the homes were showing him, see, this is how it can be. He saw the glow from inside a window, sensed the way the kids felt toward the parents, or how the parents loved each other, or even how the dog liked the way he got fed every night and rubbed on his belly. John Wayne lingered, careful not to be noticed. He didn't want to scare anyone, he just wanted to feel. Most homes reminded him of basements or art galleries. Coldness hung around them, a hint of darkness, maybe even abuse. He set his skateboard down and flew past, noticing the flickering lights of a television. His gut reaction might be wrong, but he didn't want to find out. He wanted no part. The gravelly sound of his wheels on the sidewalk calmed him. His skateboard jumped curbs, flipped down cement steps, darkness, shadows, moonlight, stars, the constant noise of the ocean, and no one to tell him what to do. He fell, but that was part of the adventure. Scrapes and bruises, once a broken arm. A stranger drove him to the hospital. The nurse injected him and told him to count backwards from 10. He tried, but he couldn't remember what came next. 10, 9, that was it. The nurse gave him a troubled look and he wanted to explain. Don't worry, I had a drug overdose, I hurt my head. But his mouth wouldn't open. He went under the anesthesia and he died for a little while. When he woke up, there was a cast on his arm and his head hurt. The dying wasn't so bad. He knew that it was a different kind of sleep, another type of waking. After the drug overdose, his mother continued to do his laundry and set the baskets by the back door of their house, along with bags of food, but otherwise his family fired him like a bad employee. His brother and sister avoided him. His mom looked at him and sobbed. They called it tough love, but it wasn't about love. John Wayne was an embarrassment. Although people pitied him, he could see pity in their faces. He didn't think the way he lived was such a bad way to go. He smoked marijuana, even when he took showers, his head far enough from the spray to keep it lit, an ashtray on the toilet seat for when he washed his hair. He no longer used cocaine and heroin, and although he somehow knew that this was connected to his brain damage, it was a relief. Money was a problem insofar as he had to do things to get it. The men took him in their cars, but it was over fast, not so bad when it was quick, and sometimes tender, unless they got angry and violent and pushed him down. He knew how to fight back, but he hated to hurt anyone. That's why he left home the first time. Once, he stabbed his stepfather's arm with scissors, but it was in self-defense. He had cried for a week. He let the men do what they needed just so long as he could get his money and keep floating through the streets. Sometimes he slept at the Newport Inn, a run-down hotel on the fringe of Costa Mesa near the freeway. Henry Wilson paid his bill each month in full. John Wayne met him every Wednesday at midnight, Wilson's black Mercedes idling in the dark, the back door ajar. The hotel sign was lit up with blinking red and blue palm trees. He didn't like the loud drunken fights in the cop cars. Otherwise, he slept under a bridge. He dug a burrow in the dirt and covered it with cardboard. The sounds of the trucks and cars driving over the bridge was better than the screams, loud music, and sirens at the hotel, but it was cold and there was no bathroom. He used the liquor store bathroom on the other side of Pacific Coast Highway, but the owner hated him ever since he'd caught him stealing a 12-pack of Coors. John Wayne ran across the highway, 12-pack under his arm, and ducked under the bridge, the man yelling, "You little fucker, try that again and I'll shoot your fucking head off." John Wayne went to AA and NA meetings. He sat on the raggedy couch, bummed cigarettes, and listened to the people talk. There were free donuts, cookies, cakes, and coffee. Once in a while, he raised his hand, made everyone in the room laugh, announcing, "Hello, my name is John Wayne, and I'm a drug addict." That was all he ever said. The people welcomed him, patted his back, and treated him kindly, and he went for the company, safety, food, coffee, and cigarettes, not to stop using drugs. He was sorry for his parents and his twin siblings with their tight faces and tight hearts. They didn't know what it was like to let the ocean come inside you. He felt it course through his veins, a charging through his heart, letting him know that he was nothing, but it didn't matter. It was okay to be nothing, because nothing was everywhere. Wind, palm trees, even the expensive cars and clothes. How could he explain that it was okay to be nothing? His stepfather called him weak and stupid. When his stepfather yelled at him, he let the words hang over his head like butterflies. He missed his mom. Sometimes he imagined it was her hot breath whispering in her ear, "You're so beautiful," not Henry Wilson. John Wayne knew that Rosie watched him from her bedroom deck. His life changed when she gave him the key to Uncle Stan's apartment over the garage of her grandparents' house, where no one went upstairs except for her. She didn't make John Wayne do anything. Sometimes she looked at him like she was sorry for him, but most of the time she just looked at him. People liked to look at him, and he learned not to talk, since that was when the people got upset, their eyes changing from pleased to disturbed. He took long, hot showers and left the red light on. There was grace in the walls, the clothes left in the closet and dresser, and the blue bong. It was as if the clothes and bong were waiting for him. The clothes fit him, and he liked the tie-dyed shirt and frayed Levi's. He wore Uncle Stan's necklace with the tooth pendant, stroking it for comfort. It was like a slender bone. From the apartment window, he watched Rosie's grandparents, engrossed in their rituals in the house below. There's Grandpa and Grandma, he thought. Watching them made him feel safe. He didn't know why. They sat on their bar stools, eating their meals, a dependability. Grandma Dot had silvery white hair. Grandpa was tanned, and there was a patch of white hair on either side of his head in a U shape. The skin between the hair reminded him of a bullseye. Their meals were poked and prodded. They took small bites. Grandpa drank vodka martini with speared olives, while Grandma Dot drank Schlitz straight from the can. She was petite, always dressed with care, so the sight of her tipping a can to her coral lips was dramatic. She sat on the bar stool with her legs crossed like an aged movie star. Grandma Dot sensed a present in her son's apartment above the garage. At first, she believed it was poor, troubled, eccentric Rosie. She began leaving 2 crisp $20 bills every week, and sometimes 3 $20 bills, in one of Grandpa's martini glasses with spending money written on a piece of paper and taped to it. She left the glass at the foot of the stairs, and whoever the person was accepted the money, leaving the empty glass for her. She became convinced that it wasn't Rosie. When her Schlitz started disappearing from the garage refrigerator, she bought 12 packs of Coors and left a note explaining that Schlitz was rather difficult to come by. John Wayne continued to sneak into the garage and steal the Coors, and although he didn't read a note that was left there, crumpling it into a ball and chucking it in the trash, he understood that he should not touch Grandma Dot's stash. Grandma Dot was a serious insomniac, her large booze intake also an attempt to lose consciousness. Secretly, when her mind was inebriated enough, she pretended that her son still lived upstairs, that he hadn't left her, and this allowed her to avoid the reality. She saw a red glow from the apartment every night, and the light didn't go off until she herself had abandoned the bar stool for bed. She liked the attention. John Wayne watched Grandma Dot through the kitchen window below while she played solitaire, sitting on a bar stool in the kitchen, on the counter beside her cards, her beer sweating on a napkin, her ashtray stockpiled with stubs, her pack of Merritts and her lighter. Once, late at night, she slipped fluidly off the bar stool. He was ready to run down the steps and save her, so sure that she had hurt herself, but she picked herself up and sat herself right back on the bar stool. Then she slowly, dramatically, drunkenly lit herself another cigarette. He saw the hallway light through a bulbous plastic window in the ceiling of the house. It looked like a lit-up blister. He began waiting for the light to go off, and then he would go downstairs. She would leave the front door open for him. The kitchen counter would be set up for their breakfast with 2 green cloth table mats and a bottle of fake sugar. Their grapefruit spoons lay upon green checkered napkins, and he would rub his thumb along the sharp ridges, amused that a spoon had this jagged feature. The wooden salt and pepper shakers were between the mats. Inside the refrigerator, he found grapefruit halves wrapped in cellophane with half cherries bleeding in their centers. It smelled like Grandma Dot. He loved the smell, part perfume, cigarettes, and something sweet and stale, something purely Grandma Dot. His meal she left for him near a warming oven, covered with tinfoil like a Christmas present. He ate at her bar stool, as close to her leftover spirit as he could get, careful not to disrupt their morning setups. He became well acquainted with Grandma Dot's taco special, her meatloaf, and her pork chops. He felt privileged, and he loved the meals as much as he imagined anyone would ever love Grandma Dot's food. There was always a cold beer in the refrigerator. He knew it was his because it was the only bottle of Coors, just one each time in a sea of Schlitz. Grandma Dot's stack of cards sat beside a glass ashtray and a cheap plastic Bic lighter near the telephone. He respected these objects, passing his fingers lightly, reverentially over them. Her cigarette stubs had bright lipstick prints like flowers of pink and coral. Afterwards, he left his plate and his utensils by the sink where she washed them properly in the morning. Once in a while, John Wayne would sleep in the small twin bed in the daisy room near the hallway, even closer to Grandma Dot. A light sleeper, he left the glass sliding door cracked open so that he could hear the bay. He named every room. The green room had wallpaper in the bathroom with green fish on it. The daisy room had large daisies across the wallpaper and a magnetic plastic daisy plant where the magnets held the daisies' heads. He would leave long before the grandparents woke and go back to Uncle Stan's apartment after making the bed, but leaving the pillow above the bedspread, a signal to Grandma Dot that not only had he eaten her meal, he had slept downstairs. He would lock the front door behind him. One morning, waking from a deep and safe sleep, he didn't make it back to the apartment before the grandparents woke. He listened patiently to their morning ritual. Grandpa made coughing noises, the newspaper rustled. They never spoke, not even a good morning or goodbye or have a good day. There wasn't hostility. John Wayne would have left. He was done with that. It was as if talking were unnecessary. The back door slammed, the house shuddered when the garage door opened and shuddered again when it closed. John Wayne and Grandma Dot were alone. He sneaked back to Uncle Stan's apartment while she washed the dishes, and it was as if she took her time with the dishes, giving him the leeway. She turned off the faucet, hands to sudsy with dish soap. He saw her listening for the tip-tap of his feet. Thank you.
John Wayne's one of the recurring characters in the book, and there's also Rosie. How did you come up with, where did this character come from? He seems
John Wayne, he's mysterious to me as well. I think he was wishful thinking on my part. When, I went through junior high and high school, and I wish there had been a John Wayne there. And the John Wayne is, for those of you who don't know, Orange County, he's mythology. He's the actor, but he's really revered in Orange County. There's a statue. There's an airport named after him, and he lives there. He has a big mansion. He lived there, and he had a big yacht, and so I kind of twisted that, I think, and turned it on its head. And the John Wayne that I created is someone that would have been completely ostracized in that community, and so I think I was poking fun at the whole myth, the macho myth of John Wayne, and when his, the real story of his life is completely different. His name was Marriott or something. John
Marriott.
Wayne, yeah.
It seems like that John Wayne is almost like an animal in his responses, the way he kind of burrows in and observes things and scopes. And you haven't thought of it?
No, I didn't think of him as I feel like he's maybe more of an idiot savant, is the way I think of him, and he's really kind of dismissed, and people don't see him as but he knows some things that people don't know, and but he lives on the streets. He does, he doesn't have a home really, and so I guess he could be sort of animal-like.
Yeah. Well, why does Rosie? What does she see in him? Why does she take him in and put him in her uncle's room like that?
I think she feels comfortable with him, and she's drawn to him, and she's not used to feeling safe and comfortable with people, and she's drawn to outsiders, obviously, and people that don't fit into the community, and people that are overlooked, and he's about as overlooked as they come, and he's really good looking, which helps, and so she's drawn to him for that. But then he's also brain damaged, so when she talks to him, there's not a lot there that you can, but she knows there's more going on.
One thing I wasn't sure of, I guess I'm going to ask everybody about their titles tonight, but
Drift.
Where does Drift come from? There's not a story called Drift in the book, right?
No, my agent Michael Carlisle and Ethan, his assistant, are here, and we came up with that title together. I really wanted the ocean features prominently in the stories, and I wanted there to be something connected. So we came up with Drift together, and then Anjali and I worked together for 2 years on the collection, my editor, and we went over different titles, and I came up with all sorts of different titles, and I tried to come up with something else, but Drift was just the right one, and it was just the steady one that made it all the way through, and I think it's the right title for the collection. Since everybody's in motion, and there's nothing,
No, I think it works well. I just think it's something you have to think about as a reader, which is a good thing.
She told me to stick with it. I had one title I remember from Remora's, there's the restaurant Shark Island, and I wanted that one for a while, but it sounded like a ride at Disneyland.
Right.
So, and it was a little too piratey, but I was, and then I thought, well, when they read the story, they'll read the newspaper clipping and they'll understand what I mean by Shark Island,
Right.
But you have to read it and it has to draw you right away. You can't read the book and then so it was tough. I still like Shark Island, but I guess
just keep it. You might find
it's a game,
occasion.
A board game or something too. It just doesn't.
One interesting thing is these stories are connected, and there's common characters, and Rosie figures prominently, but they're not exactly in chronological order.
No, yeah.
I think that's interesting also. Why did you do that instead of the more obvious thing, which would have been, start off maybe with Rosie in middle school or whenever we don't first see her, we first see her when she's older, and then we go back to that.
Again, I worked with Anjali on the ordering, and it took a long time to get that order right, and we went over it again and again, and we decided to open with Remora's because it really introduces you to, for those that don't know Newport Beach well, it's a great introductory story into the area. And then we decided from there to go with Rosie at her oldest, so you can see her, how damaged she is and where she's landed.
Right, so you have Holloway's part 2, and then you have Holloway's part 1 later.
And then from there we move chronologically with Rosie until until she gets to that point. So the point being that you would see her at her worst and then understand read how she got that way, and hopefully have more understanding and for her how she ended up.
Did you, as you were writing these stories, let's say from the beginning, did you know you were going to write about Newport Beach and
Yes.
that whole environment?
Yes, I went through junior high and high school there, and I always was writing since second grade. I've been writing. But while I was at high school, I said, I'm going to write about this place.
Right.
And you guys, I'm going to get you back. It was definitely a revenge feeling for me. And so my motives were kind of angry and maybe not so pure. But I did it. I wrote about it. I just always knew I would write about it.
Yeah. And how has it been received there?
Surprisingly well,
Right.
except for I was told that the Orange County Register, which is a really conservative paper, wouldn't do an article on me or feature on me, which shouldn't surprise me, but surprisingly well. And some of the magazines, the more glossy magazines, have recently printed essays that I've written, and one of them lambasting plastic surgery, which is ironic because every other ad in this magazine is a plastic surgery ad. So I was really surprised. They're pretty gutsy for doing that, and I think the reason being that the people that run, are writers too in these magazines, and they want to print them even though it might get it. I don't know. I'm still surprised by that. And then another essay that I wrote got published there. And then surprisingly, there's been a couple readers groups in my area that have not wanted me to come after they read the book, which was...
I mean, they wanted you to come, then they read the book. And
they invited me to come, and then I got a call from the leader of the reader group, and they said, we've had some strong reaction to this book, and you might not want to come because some of the ladies really feel strongly about it. And so I said, I don't want to come. I don't want to come. So I didn't come. There were two groups, and then there was one readers group in Newport Beach that embraced me, and they were all these ladies that were that could have been in the stories, and it was pretty amazing. And they had a buffet set up for me, and they did it at this place called Shark Island, ironically enough. That it's changed names, but it was Shark Island for a while, so they made arrangements for me to have a luncheon there, and then they fed me and talked my ear off, and they told me some pretty great stories.
So
I was taking notes, and they said they wanted to take me out to go to have Schamburgers, which is, they go to the Ritz, I don't know if you know what the Ritz is. It's this fancy restaurant, and they drink champagne and eat little mini hamburgers. And so they were going to take me to go Schamburgering.
They're called Schamburgers?
Yeah, they go Schamburgering. So I said, yeah, I want to come. I'm going to come. I want to go Schamburgering. I'm going to do it.
Well, you're showing a different side of Newport Beach.
Right, I think they appreciate that.
You're showing kind of working people.
Right.
You show wealthy people also, but you show waitresses and cooks and stuff like that. So in a way, you're not directly skewering them.
I was surprised.
Yeah.
I really thought that they might not welcome, or I don't know. I was surprised that they appreciated, I think because that area is so stereotyped with all the shows, and here's a book that maybe is saying some things that are hard to read, but it's actually going deeper and trying to give them a humanity that's not presented with the Real Housewives of Orange County, or one of those shows. So I think they appreciate that, these ladies.
And are you going to, is Newport Beach something you're going to stick with for the time being? Are you still writing about that?
Looking at Michael, too. I wrote a novel, and I did that, and it also takes place in Newport Beach. And I did tell Michael, when he asked me what I was going to write next, I said I felt like a dog with a rag doll in my mouth, just going back and forth, because I wasn't done with it. I wasn't done, but I don't know if I'm done. Maybe I'm done. I hope I'm done in a way. So, but the novel is definitely takes place in Newport Beach, and it's definitely features prominently as well.
What was the time period for this book? I wasn't entirely
This was in the
sure.
80s.
In the 80s
as
also.
well. Daniyal, I know.
You're
I'm a romantic. If you didn't already guess, I mean, come on.
Well, it's interesting because I've talked to other writers here, and I think you know, when you write about the 80s, even into the 90s, you don't have some of the complicated technological issues.
I don't want to
that
do
you have now.
texting in a story or
Right, or
cell phones even.
yeah, it's a problem for writers, I
Right. No, because I don't even like texting now.
Right.
So to have to put that in a story. The novel did take place right when cell phones got invented. So I threw a cell phone conversation in there, but yeah, I think the technology thing I'd like to avoid that in stories. Definitely.
Do you, now Rosie, is that based on, you know, kind of people you observed when you lived there?
I think Rosie is the most autobiographical. I know Rosie is the most autobiographical, and that's really why I did the Rosie stories in third person. It was easier for me to delve in there and look at her as an outsider and a character that wasn't me. But Rosie definitely has my heart and soul, even though it's fictionalized. Mom, Dad.
Right.
If you watch,
Well,
they're not here, but if
you wrote an essay about that, about people who
had a hard time with the
couldn't
book.
understand that it was fiction.
Right.
They identified too hard.
Right.
You know, from my experience, people who you're not writing about think you are writing about them.
Yeah, it was
and people
crazy.
you are writing about are clueless.
It was interesting, yeah. It was
Right?
it was fascinating because the parts that I worried about them having trouble with, you know, had no trouble with, and then they had trouble with the parts that were fictionalized, like as if they were real life, and so it was a mess there for a while. It was crazy.
Yeah. Well,
But everybody's fine. And they've supported me, you know, through all the years writing this, and
This was a long time in the making. How long did it take you to write this book?
This took about 8 years, probably 7, 8 years, but I feel like I was developing as a writer, so I feel like it took even longer.
And you had kids.
I have 2 sons. One's 12, one's 9, and I wrote all through, you know, their childhoods. They've seen me writing. They know me. They know their mom's a writer. But that was also very challenging to write with 2 young babies, kids. So I was very creative. I found ways to work.
What were the ways that you found?
I used to drop them off at the church daycare and then ditch church and go work. 2 or 3 years.
Right.
They have good childcare service there.
That's a good tip.
But I went to the early service and apparently in the adult learning thing, and then the next service, because I was very into the services. So I was there, I would get about 3 hours. And people thought I was really into the church. I was going to 2 services, you know, not just one. I had to soak it in again.
That's a new one. I haven't heard that before. You came up with that yourself?
Yeah. I was very religious there for a while.
And were there other things you did to kind of steal some time for this?
You know, like other writer, I carry notebooks around. So when they were at the park, I would be furiously scribbling, or, you know, and if I had a babysitter, I'd go and, you know, instead of going to a movie or going out with friends or I was off writing. I used to say I was having an affair with myself because I was just constantly wanting to be alone to work, and it was just definitely, I was telling Michael, my friend today, that it was like a compulsion. Or, yeah, it was more like a compulsion than an obsession, where I was so worried about it. At one point, I actually spoke with a father, again, a religious figure, and said, I have this thing, I cannot stop writing. Is there something wrong with me? And I said, have you ever had that? He said, well, I like to jog. Maybe I'm really into jogging. And I go, I don't know if it's like jogging. I just want to write all the time, and I crave it, and to the detriment of my family almost. You know, I feel bad. It's what I want to be doing.
Right.
And so he didn't know what to say. What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's a tough call. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is the stories, the way Rosie's trajectory through the stories and the way John Wayne kind of wends his way through. Is that something that you kind of pulled together at the end? Did you kind of go back and thread things through the stories? It really, I mean, it has a feeling of connection that's really strong. And when I read it a second time, and I've probably read it 3 times to prepare for this, you notice things. You see there's a story with a father,
Right.
And he's sitting like outside a hotel, and there's John Wayne. You don't know who that is if you haven't encountered him yet.
We worked on that a lot, my editor and I, again. I had a finished product, and then I was fortunate in that I got to really work with an editor, which doesn't happen a lot these days. It's more and more rare, so I feel extremely fortunate for that. And so we made it a point she really pushed me to go deeper with a lot of the stories, and also to weave them in, weave John Wayne in there more directly. And I lived and breathed those stories for so long. It was at this point where I think I would talk to my husband about the story, and he wouldn't know what I was talking about because I knew them so well and I knew what year it was. And I'd say, don't you know, she worked here for 2 years and now she's over here and this guy did it. He'd go, I don't know. I don't know the stories like you.
Did you have like a timeline kind of that you
Yeah, I knew
referred
exactly who, like the cat is in Henry's house and she comes back in Holloway's part 1, or part 2, I'm sorry. And so I knew how old she was here, and she'd quit smoking by this time when she was in this story, but she'd picked it up again, and her daughter comments on it. So I knew these characters backwards and forwards, and it was great to weave John Wayne in there and throw him in these great ways, where he's skateboarding down in Remoras, and the man yells out at him, you fucking, sorry, I shouldn't say, but anyway. So and then he just skateboards off, and that's all you see is his back and his hair.
Yeah.
So I loved that he was, really weaving through the stories and coming in and out.
Yeah, the relationship with Grandma Dot is kind of interesting, and I think, understandable also in a sense.
Yeah, I love that that the story, they never talk, but they have this deep, loving relationship. And when I wrote that story before I went to grad school or anything. I had that one, and I wrote that before I went to grad school, where they tell you not to switch point of views, and I had switched point of views in that one, and I didn't know the rules. It was funny what the rules can do. So
I heard that when you read tonight, and I thought, you have to do what you have to do to keep the story going.
I'm glad I didn't know about the rules when I wrote that, or that I had the confidence to go for that and put the 2 point of views and switch back and forth. John Wayne, he and Grandma Dot. And then the other thing about that story is, for the title, I just figured, why not? John Wayne loves Grandma Dot. He loves her. Let's put it on the title. Why not? I'm a romantic, come on. Yeah. He loves her. So I appreciate that about the title too. That's one of my favorite stories. So it was just such an honor to read it here tonight.
So the Stan, her son, is he dead or is he just...
No, he went to Vietnam he went to Canada, sorry. He skipped out, and he's just never come home. So he just fled for Canada and disappeared.
So John Wayne's obviously kind of like, from Grandma Dot's point of view, it's like having a son again, right?
It's like Rosie set them up on a date.
Yeah.
And they're happy for a while.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll have a brief intermission of about 15 minutes or so, and you'll have another chance to buy books if you'd like. Thank you. Our last reader tonight is Wells Tower. The title story of Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned, which you'll hear Wells read tonight, is a tour de force, but I found every story to be just as compelling. Wells is able to get inside the head of a wide range of characters: clueless husbands, teenage girls, old men, carnival workers, and yes, Vikings. The range and variety of these stories is what I liked best. And I encountered some of the wittiest and most descriptive description I've read in a while. I'm pleased to introduce the author of Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned, Wells Tower.
Hello. wow, look at all these literature boosters. It's so good of you to come out. So yeah, I'm gonna read kind of a final snippet of the story, Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned. It's a weird story. Yeah, the conceit is it's like these Viking guys who go a-murdering, and but there's a crew of the Viking guys who are a little less murdery, kind of mid-career, murder burnouts, and so they're not as psyched about it. But anyway, so what's going on here? Basically, this crew of the Vikings, they sort of split off from the guys who are off doing a lot of complicated killing, and one of the guys in the crew, this guy named Houghton, runs into a younger Viking who they have an argument, and the kid stabs this guy Houghton in the stomach, and Houghton cuts his head off, which is sort of like the vocabulary with these guys. Like that's how they fight and argue. But so I'm just picking up the story after this guy has been stabbed, and hopefully it'll make sense. So they're hanging out outside in this town where they're pillaging. Across the road, an old dried-up farmer had come out of his house. He stared off at the smoke from the monastery rolling down across the bay. He nodded at us. We walked over. "Hello," he said. I told him good day. He squinted at my face. "Something wrong?" I asked him. "Apologies," he said. "Just thought I recognized you is all." "Oh, it could be," I said. "I was through here last fall." "Uh-huh," he said. "Now that was a hot one. Don't know why you'd want to come back. You got everything that was worth a damn on the last going over." "Yeah," I said, "we're having a hard time figuring it ourselves. Came to see your man, Mueenuddin." This guy, they thought that he was casting spells on the Vikings, so they came to kill him, but anyway, it turned out not to be an issue. Wrong guy, looks like, but he got gotten anyway, I'm sorry to say. The man sighed. "Well, it doesn't hairlet me any. We all had to tithe in to cover his retainer. Do just as well without him, I expect. So what you doing, any looting?" "Why?" I said, "You got something to loot?" "Me? Oh, no, I got a pretty decent cook stove, but I can't see you toting that back on the ship." "Don't suppose you got a coin hoard or anything buried out back?" I said. "Man, I wish I did have. Coin hoard, I'd really turn things around for myself." "Yeah, well," I said, I don't suppose you'd own up if you did." He laughed. "You got that right, my friend, but I suppose you got to kill me or believe me, and either way, you get nothing out of the deal." He pointed at Houghton, who was leaning on Newt and looking pretty spent. "Looks like your friend's got a problem. Unless you'd like to watch him die, why don't you bring him inside? Got a daughter who's hell's own seamstress." The man, who was called Bruce, had a cozy little place. We all filed in. His daughter was standing by the stove. She gave a nervous little cry when we came through the door. She had a head full of thick black hair and a thin face, pale as sugar. A pretty girl. So pretty, in fact, you didn't notice right off she was missing an arm. But we all balked and had a good stare at her. But Newt, you could tell, was truly smitten. The way he looked, blanched and wide-eyed, he could have been facing a wild dog instead of a good-looking woman. He raked his hands through his hair, tried to lick the crust off his lips. Then he nodded and uttered a solemn hello. "Mary," Bruce said, "this man has developed a hole in his stomach. I said we'd help fix him up." Mary looked at Houghton. "Aha," she said. She lifted his tunic and surveyed the wound. "Water," she said to Earl, who was looking on. Newt eyed him jealously as he left for the well. Then Newt cleared his throat. Newt, by the way, is a widower. He's kind of this bummed-out, sort of Eeyore-ish Viking, who's a lonely guy. "I'd like to pitch in," Newt said. Mary directed him to a little sack of onions in the corner and told him to chop. Bruce got a fire going in the stove. Mary set the water on and shook in some dry porridge. Houghton, who had grown rather waxen, crawled up on the table and lay still. "I don't feel like no porridge," he said. "Don't worry about that," Bruce said. "The porridge is just for the onions to ride in on." Newt kept an eye on Mary as he bent over a small table and overdid it on the onions. When he had chopped them nearly to liquid, Mary looked over and told him, "That's fine, thank you." And Newt laid the knife down. When the porridge was cooked, Mary threw in a few handfuls of onion and took the concoction over to Houghton. He regarded her warily. But when she held the wooden spoon out to him, he opened his mouth like a baby bird. He chewed and swallowed. Doesn't taste very good, he said, but he kept on eating anyway. A minute passed, and then a peculiar thing occurred. Mary lifted Houghton's tunic again, and she put her face to the wound, and she sniffed at it. She paused a second, and then she did it again. What in the world is this? I said. Oh, you got to do this with a wound like that, said Bruce. See if he's got the porridge illness. He doesn't have any porridge illness, I said. At least he didn't before now. What he's got is a stab hole in his stomach. Now stitch the man up. Oh, it won't do any good if you smell onions coming out of that hole. It means he's got the porridge illness and he's done for. Houghton looked up. You talking about a pierced bowel? I can't believe it's as bad as all that. Mary had another sniff. The wound didn't smell like onions. She cleaned Houghton with hot water and stitched the hole to a tight pucker. Houghton fingered the stitches and, satisfied, passed out. The five of us stood around, and no one could think of anything to say. So, Newt said in an offhand way, were you born like that? Like what? Mary said. Without both arms, I mean, is that how you came out? Sir, that's a fine thing to ask my daughter, Bruce said. It was your people that did it to her. Newt said, oh, and then he said it again, and then really no one could think of anything to say. Then Mary spoke. It wasn't you who did it, she said, but the man who did, I think I'd like to kill him. Newt told her if she would please let him know who it was, he'd consider it a favor if she'd let him intervene on her behalf. Then they chat a little while longer, and oh yeah, and then they all go to a cookout. But the Eeyore guy doesn't go to the cookout. He goes to hit on the girl. Newt didn't come down to the feast. He said he needed to stay at Bruce and Mary's to look after Houghton. Bullshit, of course, seeing as Houghton made it down the hill by himself and crammed his tender stomach with about 9 tough steaks. When the dusk started going black and still no Newt, I legged it back up to Bruce's to see about him. Newt was sitting on a hollow log outside the cottage, flicking gravel into the weeds. She's coming with me, he said. Mary? He nodded. I'm taking her home with me to be my wife. She's in there talking it over with Bruce. This like a voluntary thing, I said, or an abduction type deal? Newt looked off toward the bay as though he hadn't heard the question. She's coming with me, he said. I mulled it over. You sure this is such a hot idea, bringing her back to live among our people, all things considering? He grew quiet. Any man that touches her or says anything unkind, it'll really be something different what I'll do to him. We sat a minute and watched the sparks rising from the bonfire on the beach. The warm evening wind carried smells of blossoms and wood smoke, and I was overcome with calm. We walked into Bruce's, where only a single suet candle was going. Mary stood by the window with her one arm across her chest. Bruce was worked up. When we came in, he moved to block the door. You get out of my house, he said. You just can't take her, what little I got. Newt didn't look happy, but he shouldered past, and he knocked Bruce down. I went and put a hand on the old farmer, who was quaking with rage. Mary did not hold her hand out to Newt, but she didn't protest when he put his arm around her and moved her toward the door. The look she gave her father was a wretched thing, but still she went easy. With just one arm like that, what else could she do? What other man would have her? Their backs were to us when Bruce grabbed up an awl from the table and made for Newt. I stepped in front of him and broke a chair on his face, but still he kept coming, scrabbling at my sword, trying to snatch up something that he could use to keep his daughter from going away. I had to hold him steady and run my knife into his cheek. I held it there like a horse's bit, and then he didn't want to move. When I got up off him, he was crying quietly. As I was leaving, he threw something at me and knocked the candle out. And you might think it was a good thing that Newt had found a woman who would let him love her. And if she didn't exactly love him back, at least she would, in time, get to feeling something for him that wasn't so far from it. But what would you say about that crossing, when the winds went slack and it was 5 long weeks before we finally fetched up home? Newt didn't hardly say a word to anybody, just held Mary close to him, trying to keep her soothed and safe from all of us, his friends. He wouldn't look me in the face, stricken as he was by the awful fear that comes with getting hold of something you can't afford to lose. After that trip, things changed. It seemed to me that all of us were leaving the high and easy time of life and heading into deeper waters. Not long after we got back, Jarf had a worm crawl up a hole in his foot and he had to give up raiding. Newton Mary turned to homesteading full-time and I saw less of him. Just catching up over a jar turned into a hassle you had to plan 2 weeks in advance. And when we did get together, he would laugh and jaw with me a little bit, but you could see he had his mind on other things. He'd gotten what he wanted, but he didn't seem too happy about it, just worried all the time. It didn't make much sense to me then, what Newt was going through. But after Pila and me had our little twins and we put a family together, I got an understanding of how terrible love can be. You wish you hated those people, your wife and children, because you know the things the world will do to them, because you have done some of those things yourself. It's crazy making, yet you cling to them with everything and close your eyes against the rest of it. But still, you wake up late at night and lie there listening for the creak and splash of oars, the clank of steel, the sounds of men rowing toward your home. Thank you.
That's the best Viking story I've ever heard.
I know, it's a good one, isn't it?
How did you, I mean, this is an obvious question, but how did this come to you to write a story about Vikings?
Uh-oh. Yeah, you're not mic'd.
Help me. There we go.
Oh, good.
I had to help myself.
Yeah, it's tricky.
I hate that.
No, that story kind of started in the worst way, like in just kind of a dumb, bad way, where really I was trying to just write a smart-ass joke. I was in graduate school and I was doing a lot of kind of heartfelt fiction, and then I just thought maybe this would be a fun gag to do like a Raymond Carver story set during a Viking siege, and and that was really it, that it would be a bunch of kind of cheap yucks, and I would poke fun at a certain literary tradition, and then I would be done. But then the thing that I like about that story, even though it seems kind of weird and simple and folk artish to me when I go back and read it now, it did this thing where it kind of tricked me into caring about the characters and not just to kind of do this, cold, wise-ass maneuver. And I think a short story should outwit its original conception.
That's interesting. So where does this story come in terms of the collection? Was this something you wrote early
It's old. Yeah, it's about, I think, the 4th short story I ever wrote, I guess. Maybe 5th, something like that.
Are you ever going to write about Vikings again?
Pretty much everything from now on is going to be about Vikings.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like Cash Machine. It's so awesome.
Listen, Vikings are the new vampires.
I'm sure there will be. Actually, I was thinking today, somebody was telling me I should write a vampire book now. But I think that's played out. I think I'm going to write like a blob book. I think those would be good. Oh yeah, no more Vikings. That's done. Yeah, sorry.
So so people don't get the wrong idea. That this stands out as a little bit unusual. I mean, the amazing thing is that the tone is pretty much the same as in the other stories, and the feeling for the characters. But the other stories are more contemporary. Yeah.
The Viking story is really anomalous. I mean, it's. I think it is a kind of a weird one. But then again, I mean, I think all the stories are kind of strange and maybe incongruous. That it's not a book that I conceived as a coherent volume. I mean, they just happened to be the first 9 stories I wrote that seemed like they were worth holding on to.
There's a coherence to it.
I guess.
I mean, I think that's essential to a collection, and even when it's disparate pieces, I think that there's something that in this collection, I think, that ties the stories together.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're all stories about people who are in trouble. And people who find themselves in extremes and who are trying to make family work against long, grotesque odds, usually.
Yeah,
I guess.
recognizable characters.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, now you also did, there's a story in here called Retreat.
Yeah.
And it's about two brothers who don't get along very well.
No, they don't.
I won't ask you if that's based on your own experience, but
It's very kind of you.
But you also, is that based on your own experience? But you also wrote another story that's not in the collection that kind of flips that story and shows it from the other brother's point of view.
Right. Yeah. That story was initially published. So yeah, the basic concept of the story is these two brothers who don't get along, and one brother has this place up in Maine, and he invites his younger brother, and they go moose hunting, and it ends poorly. And it was initially published, told from the point of view of the younger brother, who was the much kind of smarter, more sensitive, sympathetic character, and the older brother was this kind of nasty, overbearing blowhard who was wanting to, put up McDonald's on this unspoiled piece of property in Maine. And when I sat down with the pages for the collection, somehow the emotional, histogram or whatever of the story just seemed really flat and dumb to me. That the narrator was really self-congratulatory, and the antagonist in the form of the older brother was despicable, and so he continued to behave despicably, and then is punished at the end by ingesting a potentially lethal portion of moose meat. And it's true. Yeah, it just seemed so uninteresting to me, and it seemed like a much more challenging route to try to tell the story from the point of view of the less sympathetic character.
So the story that's in the book is the second take on it.
Yeah.
It's kind of the flipped version of it. That's interesting. Is that unique to that story, or have you kind of turned around other stories?
No, I inflicted pretty significant violences on just about every story in the collection after the manuscript was accepted. And I mean, often it took the form of, sometimes I would just jettison the whole cast of characters.
Right.
And a lot of the stories had been published in magazines already, so that was kind of a weird thing to do. But really, I would sort of look at the story and think, what's the emotional problem in the story? And usually that's something you have no idea about until you've gotten, through a number of reasonably successful drafts. That often a story might just be born out of, a line or some moment or some idea of what might work, and often that's not the thing that makes the story work, that the characters start to do something interesting.
Right.
And there starts to be some emotional trouble. And so then when I was going back and doing the revising, I was really thinking, what's the emotional problem of the story, and who are the best people to have that problem, or to get to the bottom of it? This other weird story, Door in Your Eye, that was initially published in Public Space, and it was, this one actually was kind of based, I don't really write from my own life much, but when I lived in New Orleans years ago, I lived across the street from this kind of unknown neighbor who I was told was a prostitute. And that was exciting, because I would sit on my porch and I'd see these men kind of going in and out of the apartment of this woman who I never even got a look at her. And after I'd been down there for about a year, I finally saw this woman. She was a very prim woman in her maybe early 60s. And she sort of had this like Shaker matron hairdo, and it turned out she wasn't a prostitute at all. She was a drug dealer. And so I wrote this story. It was initially published. It was a story about like kind of a sort of me-ish person who goes and one day goes across the street and meets this woman who he thinks is a prostitute, and it turns out she's actually a drug dealer, and like
Right.
that. And that seemed also bad when it was time for me to revise it, because it just didn't, like, why do we care that some young white guy is having this run-in with this dangerous person? And so in revision, I made the guy, I think in his mid-80s, and it seemed to matter so much more if this interaction is sort of freighted with this deal where it's like maybe the last erotic experience of this guy's life, and suddenly things matter more. And so I did a lot of that kind of stuff in the revision.
This is a question someone actually in the audience asked me during the intermission. Why did you write a book of short stories instead of, let's say, a novel?
Because you get to make more mistakes more rapidly. For me, it was, the book was really my kind of apprenticeship at literature, and it was a great, the short story is a great laboratory, a great way to try different approaches and styles and, narrative perspectives. And, I think it's a kind of an intriguing book just because, I was just trying to skin the cat in so many different ways. That there are some stories that have kind of tidy plots, and then other stories that are really trying to be super funny, and then other stories that are really going for, a lot of kind of language clouds, and and then other stories where I, kind of the later stories where I just said I'm going to put down all of the tricks and try to write, as simply and as emotionally nakedly as I possibly can, and to really try to get to know the character. So yeah, there's there are a bunch of different missions that I was sort of going after in the book.
So is this a long process? Did this happen over a
Yeah, it was
lot of time?
about 7 years.
Wow.
I mean, I was doing a fair amount of magazine work at the same time, but that seemed to me like a good amount of time to spend on it.
The stories are kind of set all over the place, but you're from North Carolina. You're a Southerner.
Well, sort of, yeah.
Sort of.
Well, I mean, I sort of corn-pone it up and stuff when I come to New York. But no, I come from Chapel Hill, which is a college town.
Right.
And, my parents are from the north. I really can't, claim a lot of cowboy boots or
You're not from Mayberry? Let's say?
No, but that's where Chang and Eng are from, don't you know?
Really?
Mount Airy, yeah, North Carolina, up in the mountains, great town. Anyway.
So, do you consider yourself? I mean, there's this tradition of Southern writers, and do you feel connected to that in your work?
To some extent, I really admire a lot of Southern writers. I love Flannery O'Connor. I love Walker Percy, Faulkner. Barry Hannah. It's a terrible, terrible loss. But at the same time, actually, about a year ago or a year and a half ago, I was doing a profile on Barry Hannah, who just died Monday. And he was talking about it, and he just said, man, that Southern thing, he said, be careful with it, because it's like, once it gets out that you're like a Southern person, everyone thinks you're just going to be writing about porches and banjos, and, and it's, you can kind of get into this thing where it's all like, the motes of the kind of biscuit flour billowing in the morning sunlight, and that kind of crap. I mean, there's a kind of... I think that there's something about the way that people use language in the South that I really like, and and I'm sure that's true of any kind of particular ways that people use language in any part of the country. But there are certain kind of linguistic things that I like about the South. But I don't really want to get into like the donkey and biscuit circuit.
Right.
It'd be bad.
There's another interesting story in the collection that takes place at a carnival, and it has kind of a shifting point of views in that. Is that, did you start off with the shifting point of views, or did you tell a story maybe through one character and then
No,
break
that
it
story
up?
was initially published in Harper's it was a first-person thing, and somehow, that story grew out of the first magazine assignment that I ever did, where I got a job in a traveling carnival. And I've been working for this magazine, Double Take. It's a really beautiful magazine that is no longer with us. But it was a magazine that was very much about, community and penetrating stereotypes and that sort of thing. And so I wrote this very earnest pitch to the Washington Post magazine about how I wanted to get a job at a traveling carnival in order to penetrate stereotypes about carnies, and to show like the beauty of this like traveling family people. And then I went and I got the job at the carnival. I was operating the pirate ship ride, and I immediately figured out that every awful thing you've ever heard about carnival workers is true times a million.
Right.
Like I didn't meet anybody who hadn't committed a multiple homicide, and that was pretty terrifying. But yeah, and so I kind of treasured those notes. I took a bunch of notes, and then it got chopped down to sort of modest magazine-sized story, and I always wanted to do something with it. And the first kind of not very creative way that I approached turning that into fiction was just to kind of, again, tell the story from a me-ish kind of person.
Right.
And then I thought actually doing a more kind of Altman-esque thing where, we're seeing, 4 or 5 different stories that are happening all around the carnival would be a more interesting way to convey the full hideousness of that place.
You've, it seems like you've kind of worked your way up to writing through a lot of different experiences, traveled and different things. You've done this. Did you do the journalism before you started writing fiction, or was that kind of at the same time?
Not so much.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that was kind of simultaneous. I'd published the Carnival story, was my only kind of magazine piece before I went to graduate school at Columbia, where I studied fiction and did an MFA. So they kind of happened at the same time.
And you also had a punk band, I've read recently. It's surfaced, this whole interest
It's weird. Everyone always wants to talk about the punk band. Yeah, it was something that I did between the ages of 16 and maybe 21. I'm 36 now.
Yeah. I wish my son were here because he plays punk and he thinks it'll last forever.
My band was really crappy, and I knew that. And actually, the other guys in the band were very gifted, and they went on to do great things. But I knew at an early age that I was a really mediocre guitar player and a really wretched singer, which happened a couple of times regrettably. But and I knew then that I should stop playing music and I should start trying to write. Yet now, somehow it's something that I've been getting all the time in interviews, like, tell us about the punk band.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we lived in this terrible van and we ate a lot of peanut butter. Pretty awesome.
But there's some writing to that also, in a sense, right? You're writing words that nobody can hear because of the singing, perhaps. But.
Yeah, I could never do it. I guess I did write some, dismal lyrics here and there, but it's just wasn't a form that I was suited to. I feel like I really need the space of prose. I don't really write poetry either.
Mm-hmm. So that's behind you, and you're.
Yes. Yeah.
It's good to know. I think a 36-year-old punk.
Why, you play
rock
bass or something?
No. No, do you want to have a band?
Yeah, we could talk about it. Yeah, sure.
So are you going to continue to write stories, do you think? Are you moving into
I'm working on a novel now,
Mm-hmm.
and that's enjoyable. But I love the short story. It's so challenging. I still find it really, really tough.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking actually when I was in graduate school, I kept thinking there was a formula for writing a story. Like, if you have maybe 10 sentences of exposition and 2 paragraph conflicts that come after this, or conflict paragraphs. I was really trying to diagram it so I could just crack the code and write a good short story every time. And I remember actually going to see Barry Hannah do a reading here at the New School, and there were lots of people like me there who wanted to figure out the code. And somebody said, hey, Mr. Hannah, can you tell us what the secret for writing short stories is? And he just went, get in and get out. Which I really wish I could follow that advice, but it's pretty
not
great.
so easy to do.
Yeah.
Well, that's good advice, and that's probably a good note to end on. So.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you very much.
This is a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Well, now comes the part where Julie Lindsay is going to come and announce the winners. But before that, let's have another round of applause for the authors who are just fantastic. And thank you. And now Julie Lindsay, who's the founder of the Story Prize, will announce this year's winner.
Congratulations to our 3 finalists, and thank you, Daniyal, Tori, and Wells, for a very interesting evening. The point of the evening, of course, is to bring attention to writers of short stories and their collections. This is our 6th year celebrating this wonderful art form. Daniyal, Tori, and Wells are finalists tonight because their collections were chosen by Larry and me out of the 78 book entries we received in 2009. Our panel of 3 judges who have decided the winner of this year's Story Prize include the New York author A.M. Holmes, the L.A. book critic Carolyn Kellogg, and the Ohio librarian Bill Kelly. 2 finalists tonight will take home a prize check of $5,000, and the winner will receive $20,000. I am pleased to announce the winner of this year's Story Prize. It is Daniyal Mueenuddin for In Other Rooms, Other Wonders. Daniyal, do you want to come up to receive the bowl?
Daniel? Yes, please do. Congratulations on accepting the award.
I'll be very brief. I'd like to thank 2 people. One is my agent, Bill Clegg, who sort of believed in me before anybody else did. And the other person is my mother, who just died, actually. And she was the person who, when I was little, made me think that becoming a writer is a sort of legitimate thing to do. And though there were many sort of ups and downs and ups and downs, but I won't try to pronounce it. Vicissitudes. But she was behind me all the way. So I'd like to thank her. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Daniel, just stay up on the stage for a second. Let me take a picture.
Oh, lovely.
Hang on for a second. We're going to take a picture. You want to kind of wrap things up? Or?
Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you next year.
Yeah.